The Bering Sea does not breathe. It gasps. It is a place where the atmosphere and the ocean are locked in a perpetual, violent wrestling match, stripping the heat from anything foolish enough to enter its domain. On a Tuesday morning that looked more like twilight, the horizon was gone, erased by a wall of freezing fog that rolled off the Russian coastline like smoke from a burning city. The water was a bruised purple, heavy and oily, heaving with a swell that originated thousands of miles away in the Arctic Circle. In this monochrome world of gray sky and black water, color is an intruder. It is a violation of the natural order. But then, 300 yards off the port bow of the research trawler Aurora, a fissure opened in the sea. It wasn't the dark, slick back of a standard cetacean that broke the surface. It was a shock of bone white. A dorsal fin, 6 feet tall and ragged at the trailing edge, sliced through the gloom like a jagged shard of porcelain. It rose, and it kept rising, revealing a back that defied every rule of evolutionary camouflage. It was not the stark black and white tuxedo pattern of the Albino Orca. It was a ghost. A 10-ton phantom glowing with a spectral, milky luminescence against the dark canvas of the deep. This was not a trick of the light. It was not a reflection of the ice. It was the rarest predator on planet Earth, a creature that biology dictates should not exist, yet here it was, exhaling a plume of mist that lingered in the freezing air like a question mark. If you have an appetite for the unexplained mysteries of the natural world, and the true stories that science struggles to rewrite, make sure you smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We are heading into the most remote waters on the map to hunt a ghost, and you are not going to want to miss what happens next. Dr. Kaelen Vance stood on the rusted steel grating of the Aurora's observation deck, his knuckles white as they gripped the freezing rail. He had spent 15 years chasing rumors in the sprawling, lawless expanse of the North Pacific. He had chased blurry photographs taken by terrified crab fishermen who claimed to have seen a sea monster. He had chased sonar ghosts that vanished into the noise of submarine canyons. He had staked his entire academic reputation, his marriage, and his sanity on the existence of this single animal. Most marine biologists called it a myth, a collective hallucination born of isolation, sleep deprivation, and cheap vodka. They said an all-white orca, an albino or leucistic bull, could not survive into adulthood. He would be too visible to hunt. He would be an outcast from the pod, unable to coordinate with the pack. He would be a target for every other predator in the ocean. Yet the creature moving alongside the boat was not a starving outcast. He was massive. Kaelen lifted his binoculars, the lenses fogging instantly with his breath. He wiped them with a gloved thumb and refocused, his hands trembling not from the cold, but from the adrenaline dumping into his bloodstream. The animal was logging on the surface, moving with the slow, deliberate lethargy of a king surveying his kingdom. "It's him," Kaelen whispered, the words snatched away by the biting wind. "It's really him." The whale was known in the whispered legends of the Kamchatka coast as Belyi Prizrak, the White Ghost, but Kaelen had named him Orion, after the hunter in the stars. Orion was terrifyingly large. Even at this distance, the scale of the animal warped Kaelen's sense of perspective. A typical male transient orca might reach 26 feet and weigh 6 tons. Orion looked closer to 30 feet. His skin was not the pure, clean white of a sheet of paper. It was the color of old ivory, marred by a map of scars that told a history of violence and survival. There were rake marks, tooth scratches from other orcas running down his flank in parallel lines. There were circular pockmarks from cookie-cutter sharks that had taken plugs of flesh years ago. And there, just behind the blowhole, was a long, jagged trench of pinkish scar tissue that looked suspiciously, horrifyingly like the graze of a boat propeller. "Depth sounder is going crazy, Doc." The voice of the skipper, Captain Halloway, crackled over the deck intercom, cutting through Kaelen's trance. "You need to see this. Now." Kaelen scrambled into the wheelhouse, the sudden warmth of the heater stinging his frozen cheeks. Holloway, a man whose face looked like it had been carved out of driftwood and cured in salt, was tapping the glass of the sonar array with a nicotine-stained finger. "Look at the scattering layer," Holloway said, his voice tight. "It's not fish. It's too dense. And it's too organized." The screen was awash of red and yellow blobs, usually indicative of a massive shoal of herring or mackerel. But these blobs weren't moving erratically. They were holding a formation. "They're under him," Kaelen realized, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "They're all under him." Orion wasn't alone. He wasn't a solitary wanderer. He was the tip of the spear. Beneath the white bull, holding station in the deep water where the light couldn't reach, was a pod of at least 20 other orcas. They were running dark, submerged, invisible to the naked eye, but screamingly obvious to the high-frequency sonar. They were moving in a phalanx formation, a military-style wedge used to herd massive shoals of prey, or, more disturbingly, to confront a threat. "Why is he on the surface?" Kaelen asked, the question hanging in the humid air of the bridge. If they're hunting, they should be coordinating deep. If they're traveling, they should be porpoising to conserve energy. Why is the most visible member of the pod floating like a buoy? "He's bait," Holloway said, lighting a cigarette with a trembling hand. "Or he's the distraction." Kaelen looked back out the salt-streaked window. The white fin had turned. It was no longer parallel to the ship. It was facing them. In the wild, eye contact with an apex predator is a primal event. It triggers a cascade of neurochemical warnings that date back to when humans were scurrying rodents, trying to avoid being eaten on the savannah. When Orion rose in the water, executing a spy op, lifting his massive, conical head 10 feet into the air, Kaelen felt that ancient fear seize his throat. The whale's eye was visible. Usually, an orca's eye is hidden in the black patch of skin, almost impossible to see without a zoom lens. But on Orion, the skin was white. The eye was a stark, pinkish-red orb, the color of a setting sun through smoke. It didn't look like a fisheye. It didn't look vacant. It looked intelligent. It looked judging. "He's watching us," Kaelen said, stepping closer to the glass. "He knows we're here. He's assessing the threat level. He's counting us." "He's got company," Holloway interrupted, his eyes shifting to the radar screen. "We've got a contact. Fast mover, coming in from the southeast. No transponder. No eye signature." Kaelen looked at the green sweep of the radar. A blip was closing the distance at 30 knots. That was fast. Too fast for a fishing trawler. Too aggressive for a cargo ship. Poachers? Kaelen asked, the dread pooling in his stomach like lead. "Or collectors," Holloway spat, exhaling a cloud of blue smoke. "A white orca? That's a $10 million bounty in the right black market. Some oligarch in Dubai or Shanghai would pay anything to have that ghost in a private tank. Or maybe it's the military. Rumor has it the Russians are restarting their marine mammal programs." The realization hit Kaelen with the force of a physical blow. They weren't the only ones hunting Orion. They were just the only ones hunting him with cameras. "Get us closer," Kaelen ordered, his voice hardening. "If we're close, maybe they won't shoot. They won't risk an international incident with a registered American research vessel. If they're running dark this far out, Doc, they don't care about incidents," Holloway warned, but he pushed the throttle forward. The Aurora groaned, its diesel engine coughing black smoke as it surged toward the white whale. Orion dropped back into the water with a splash that sent spray flying. He didn't dive. He didn't run. He slapped his tail against the surface, a thunderous crack that echoed like a gunshot across the water. Crack, crack. It was a signal, a percussive command. Beneath the surface, the sonar screen cleared instantly. The 20 other whales vanished from the display. They had dove deep, scattering into the thermal layers where sonar couldn't track them. "He sent them away," Kaelen whispered. He's clearing the field. Or he's setting a trap, Holloway muttered, checking the flare gun in the emergency kit. The mystery of the albino orca wasn't just his color. It was his survival. How does a creature that glows like a beacon survive in an ocean full of things that want to kill it? How does he sneak up on prey? The answer, Kaelen was beginning to suspect, was that he didn't sneak. He didn't hide. He was the one thing the ocean had never seen before. A decoy. The unmarked ship broke through the fog bank a mile out. It was a sleek, converted corvette, painted a matte, radar-absorbing gray. It moved with predatory grace, its bow cutting the water with barely a wake. On the foredeck, uncovered and swiveled toward the water, was a harpoon cannon. But it wasn't rigged with an explosive tip for killing. It was rigged with a containment net. "They're going to take him," Kaelen said, grabbing his radio. "Hail them. Tell them we are broadcasting live. Tell them we have satellite uplink." Holloway grabbed the mic. "Unidentified vessel. This is the research vessel Aurora. You are operating in protected waters. We have you on video. We are transmitting your coordinates to the Russian Coast Guard and the U.S. Navy. Stand down immediately." The radio crackled with static. No response. The gray ship didn't slow down. It adjusted its course, aiming not for the Aurora, but slightly to the side, anticipating the whale's movement. "They don't care," Holloway said, slamming the mic down. "They know we're bluffing. The nearest Coast Guard is 6 hours away. They can bag him and be in international waters before anyone wakes up." Orion was still on the surface. He was swimming slowly, exposing his massive flank. He looked vulnerable. He looked like an easy target, a prize waiting to be claimed. Why isn't he running? Kaelen screamed at the windshield, his scientific objectivity shattering. "Dive, you idiot! Dive!" The gray ship closed to 500 yards. The gunner on the bow adjusted the elevation of the net cannon. Kaelen could see the man through his binoculars, wearing a thick parka and a headset, his hand hovering over the trigger mechanism. Then, the water around the gray ship changed. It wasn't a wave. It was a disruption. A massive release of bubbles rose from the deep, creating a curtain of white foam directly in the path of the approaching vessel. "Bubble net?" Kaelen breathed. "But they only do that for herring. They use it to corral fish." The gray ship hit the aerated water. Physics took over. Water filled with air bubbles is less dense than solid water. The buoyancy of the gray ship evaporated instantly. The bow dropped like a stone, plunging downward into the froth. The ship lurched violently, the sudden deceleration throwing the gunner on the foredeck against the railing. The net cannon fired prematurely, the heavy-weighted mesh launching harmlessly into the sky before splashing into the sea, 50 yards short of the whale. Orion rolled. He turned toward the floundering ship, and then the ocean erupted. It wasn't just Orion. The pod hadn't scattered. They hadn't run. They had flanked the enemy. 4 massive male orcas breached simultaneously on the port side of the gray ship, their bodies slamming into the water to create a displacement wave. On the starboard side, 3 more breached. They were rocking the boat. They were using their mass, their speed, and the physics of the ocean to destabilize the vessel. "They're attacking the ship," Holloway said, his cigarette falling from his mouth, ash scattering on the console. "I've seen them attack ice floes to knock seals off. I've never seen them attack a steel hull." Kaelen watched in awe and horror. This wasn't instinct. This was tactics. This was warfare. Orion was the general. He had drawn the enemy in, holding their attention with his impossible brightness, making himself the target, while his soldiers moved into position beneath the hull to prepare the battlefield. The gray ship's engines roared, trying to reverse out of the bubble field, but the propellers were churning nothing but foam. They had no bite. The vessel was dead in the water, wallowing in a trap made of air. "They disabled it," Kaelen said. "They neutralized the threat without touching it. But the gray ship wasn't defenseless. A second man appeared on the deck, holding a high-powered rifle. He aimed not at the water, but at the Aurora. A sharp crack splintered the air, and the glass of the wheelhouse shattered a foot to Kaelen's left, sending a spiderweb of fractures across the pane. "Get down!" Holloway roared, spinning the wheel hard to port. "They're shooting at us!" Kaelen yelled, dropping to the deck amidst a shower of safety glass. "They want no witnesses," Holloway shouted, ducking below the console. "Hold on." The Aurora heeled over, turning its stern to the shooters. But as Kaelen looked back through the broken window, he saw something that froze his blood. Orion had stopped his display. He was sinking, but he wasn't diving to safety. He was diving toward the gray ship's propellers. "He's going for the screws," Kaelen whispered, realizing the suicidal geometry of the move. "He's going to try to break the drive shaft." "He can't," Holloway grunted, fighting the wheel. "That's stainless steel. It'll chop into pieces." "He doesn't know that," Kaelen said, scrambling up. "We have to stop him. If he hits those props, he dies." The mystery of the Albino Orca was about to turn into a tragedy. Kaelen looked at the gray ship, then at the white shadow moving rapidly toward the churning death of the propellers. He had spent his life looking for this animal, and now, minutes after finding him, he was about to watch him commit suicide in a desperate attempt to defend his pod. "Turn around," Kaelen said. "What?" "Turn around. Ram them if you have to. Distract them. We can't let him die." "You want me to take a rust bucket trawler against a paramilitary corvette armed with automatic weapons?" Holloway looked at him like he was insane. "I want you to save the most important biological discovery of the century," Kaelen said, his eyes burning. "Turn the boat." Holloway hesitated, looking at the jagged glass, then cursed loudly. He spun the wheel. The Aurora swung back around, heading straight into the kill zone. The Aurora was not built for combat. It was a floating laboratory, a patchwork of steel plates and good intentions held together by rust and marine epoxy. As Captain Holloway swung the bow back toward the gray corvette, the old trawler groaned in protest, the hull vibrating violently against the strain of the turn. Kaelen scrambled to his feet, ignoring the glass shards biting into his palms. Through the shattered window, the scene unfolding ahead was a chaotic tableau of biology versus technology, a primal drama playing out in the cradle of a storm. The gray corvette was wallowing in the bubble field, its engines screaming in high-pitched futility as the propellers churned the aerated water. The gunner on the deck had recovered his balance and was reloading the net cannon with frantic, jerky motions. The sniper, seeing the Aurora turn back, shifted his aim from the water to the bridge of the trawler. Ping! A bullet sparked off the metal plating of the wheelhouse, inches from Holloway's head, sending a spray of hot metal into the cabin. "Get low!" Holloway screamed, crouching behind the heavy steel of the helm console, steering by the glow of the sonar display alone. "I'm going to try to cut across their bow. Make them swerve. If I can force them into the trough of the swell, while they have no forward momentum, they might roll." Kaelen wasn't looking at the shooters. He was looking at the water. The white shadow of Orion was gone, submerged beneath the churning foam of the corvette's stern. The whale had vanished into the violent wash of the very machinery that threatened to butcher him. "He's under them," Kaelen whispered, grabbing the dashboard to steady himself against the rolling deck. "He's going for the kill." Underwater, the world was a deafening roar of cavitation and engine noise. For a creature that relied on sound to see, it must have been blinding a whiteout of sensory overload. But Orion wasn't hunting with sonar now. He was hunting with memory. He had learned the anatomy of ships. He knew that the vibration was strongest at the stern. He knew that the spinning blades were the source of the ship's power, the beating heart of the metal beast. Most animals flee from mechanical noise. It hurts them. It confuses them. But Orion was different. He was the ghost. He had survived because he moved toward the things that others feared. From the deep, he surged upward. He didn't bite the propeller. That would be suicide. The stainless steel blades would shear through bone and blubber in an instant. Instead, he aimed for the rudder. The rudder of a corvette is a large, flat plane of steel, controlled by hydraulic pistons. It is the ship's steering fin. It is the Achilles heel. Orion hit it with his shoulder. 10 tons of muscle, accelerating at 30 miles per hour, impacted the steel plate. The sound was audible even on the Aurora, a dull, resonant thud that sounded like a hammer hitting a church bell underwater. It vibrated through the hull of the trawler, a physical sensation that traveled up through the soles of Kaelen's boots. The gray corvette lurched violently to port. The sniper was thrown off his feet, his rifle skittering across the deck and over the rail into the abyss. The net cannon swung wild, firing its heavy mesh into the sea, a useless tangle of rope and lead. "He hit them," Kaelen yelled, watching the corvette shudder. He rammed the rudder. The corvette began to spin. Without steering, and with the propellers fighting for grip in the bubble-filled water, the ship was at the mercy of the ocean's momentum. It turned broadside to the oncoming swell, exposing its flank to the fury of the Bering Sea. A 20-foot wave, building for miles across the open water, rose up like a gray wall. It caught the corvette in its most vulnerable position. The ship heeled over, listing 40 degrees. Containers on the deck slid. Equipment crashed into the railings. Men scrambled for purchase on the wet steel. "They're going over," Holloway said, watching the inclinometer in his mind. If they take one more hit, but the ocean wasn't done. The pod Orion soldiers surfaced again. They lined up on the windward side of the listing ship. They didn't ram. They synchronized. 5 massive bodies breached together, launching themselves out of the water and crashing down in unison. They created a localized displacement wave, a rogue swell of their own making, that hit the corvette's hull just as it was trying to right itself. It was a perfectly timed push. It was physics weaponized by instinct. The corvette groaned. Water poured over the gunwale, flooding the aft deck. The ship didn't capsize fully, but it was dead in the water, listing heavily to starboard. Its electronics likely flooded, its engine room taking on water. It was no longer a predator. It was a wreck. The Aurora closed the distance. Holloway pulled back on the throttle, bringing the trawler alongside the disabled vessel, keeping a safe distance from the thrashing whales. The wind howled through the shattered windows of the wheelhouse. "You boys all right over there?" Holloway boomed over the PA system, his voice laced with grim satisfaction. On the deck of the corvette, the crew was scrambling, slipping on the wet steel. They looked terrified. They weren't looking at the Aurora. They weren't reaching for their weapons. They were looking at the water. Orion surfaced. He rose slowly, majestically, right next to the corvette's rail. His white skin was glowing in the diffuse light, a beacon of impossible biology. He blew a plume of mist that drifted over the deck, coating the men in the smell of the deep ocean salt, copper, and decay. He rolled onto his side, his red eye fixed on the captain of the corvette, who stood paralyzed near the bridge. It was a moment of impossible communication. The predator and the poacher, the ghost and the machine. Orion opened his mouth and let out a sound. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a click. It was a low, vibrating hum that resonated through the hulls of both ships. It sounded like a warning. It sounded like a landlord evicting a tenant. "This is my ocean. Leave." Then, with a slap of his tail that sent a spray of freezing water soaking the men on the deck, he dove. The pod followed him, vanishing into the deep, leaving only swirling eddies on the surface. The confrontation was over. The whales had won. "Did you get that?" Kaelen asked, his hands shaking violently as he checked the cameras mounted on the Aurora's mast. "Tell me we got that." "We got it," Holloway said, lighting another cigarette, his hand trembling just as much as Kaelen's. "But who are we going to show it to? If we release this, Every trophy hunter in the world will be out here with a bigger boat and bigger guns. If we show the world that a whale can take down a warship, the Navy won't study them. They'll bomb them. Kaelen looked at the empty water. The fog was closing in again, erasing the scene as if it had never happened. Holloway was right. The mystery of the Albino Orca was a burden. If the world knew he existed, he was doomed. If the world knew he could disable a corvette, he was a target for dissection. We don't show it, Kaelen said quietly, the adrenaline crashing into exhaustion. We bury it. You spent 15 years looking for him, Doc. You sacrificed your tenure. You lost your wife. You're just going to walk away? I found him, Kaelen said, looking at the spot where the white fin had disappeared. That's enough. He doesn't need to be famous. He needs to be left alone. They turned the Aurora north, leaving the disabled corvette drifting in the fog, its crew busy fighting the ingress of water. But as they steamed away, Kaelen sat in the mess hall, reviewing the sonar logs from the encounter. He was looking for a pattern. He was looking for where Orion had come from before the attack. The sonar track showed the pod descending after the fight. But they weren't just diving to escape. They were heading for a specific feature on the ocean floor. A trench. The Aleutian Trench runs deep here, plunging to over 25,000 feet. It is a scar on the planet's crust, a place of immense pressure and absolute darkness. Why go there? Kaelen muttered, tracing the depth lines on the chart. There's no food down there, just pressure and darkness. They can't hunt at that depth, unless there was something else. He pulled up a geological survey map from the 1980s, a dusty file on the ship's computer. The area where the whales had dove was marked with a peculiar notation. Thermal anomaly. Volcanic vents. Heat, Kaelen realized. They're going to the heat. It made sense. In the freezing waters of the Bering Sea, energy conservation is everything. Blubber is expensive to maintain. If there were hydrothermal vents down there, the water would be warmer. It would be a sanctuary, a place to rest without burning calories, a hidden fortress where the cold couldn't reach them. Turn the boat around, Kaelen said, running back to the bridge, his fatigue forgotten. Doc, we just escaped a gunfight, Holloway groaned, rubbing his eyes. We are going home. I need a drink. Not yet. We need to see where they live. If we know where they sleep, we can protect it. We can get it designated as a marine sanctuary before the poachers come back with reinforcements. We need to define the habitat. Holloway looked at Kaelen's desperate face. He saw the fire that had driven the man to the edge of the world. He sighed, crushing his cigarette out. One pass. We do one sonar pass over the trench. Then we are gone. They motored slowly to the coordinates. The water was calm now, the storm having passed, leaving behind a heavy, oppressive silence. The fog was thinning, revealing patches of starless sky. Kaelen watched the depth sounder. 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet, 5,000 feet. The bottom dropped away into the abyss. Here, Kaelen said. Scan the trench wall. The sonar pinged. The return signal took seconds to bounce back from the crushing depths. On the screen, a picture began to form. It showed the jagged walls of the canyon, sheer cliffs of rock. And then, at a depth of 3,000 feet, it showed a shelf, a plateau jutting out from the trench wall. And on that plateau, there were shapes, not rocks. Are those structures? Holloway asked, squinting at the screen, his skepticism warring with the data. The sonar resolution was low, but the geometry was unmistakable. There were pillars. There were arches. They looked like basalt columns, natural formations perhaps, but arranged in a circle. It looked like Stonehenge on the bottom of the world. It looks like a henge, Kaelen whispered. And hovering around the structures were the whales. Hundreds of them. It wasn't just Orion's pod. It was a gathering, a congregation. The sonar screen was a blizzard of biological contacts. Orcas from different pods, perhaps different clans, gathered in the dark warmth of the vents. It's a city, Kaelen breathed. It's a necropolis. Or a nursery. Whales don't build cities, Doc. We don't know what they do, Kaelen said, his voice trembling with the magnitude of the discovery. We've only ever watched them on the surface. That's like studying humans by only looking at people walking on the sidewalk. We don't see their homes. We don't see where they go when the work is done. Orion wasn't just a leader. He was a guardian. He was guarding the sanctuary. He was the gatekeeper of the secret place. Suddenly, the sonar screen went white. Static filled the display. A high-pitched squeal erupted from the speakers, forcing Kaelen to rip his headphones off in pain. Jamming, Holloway yelled. Someone is jamming our sonar. No, Kaelen said, staring at the white noise. That's not electronic jamming. That's biological. They're screaming at the transducer. They're blinding us. They didn't want to be seen. They had tolerated the surface encounter because it was a battle. But this was their secret. This was sacred. The noise was a wall, a kinetic barrier constructed of sound. Shut it down, Kaelen said. Turn off the sonar. Now. Holloway killed the power. The screen went black. The screaming stopped instantly. The aurora drifted in silence over the abyss. Below them, 3,000 feet down, a civilization of intelligent leviathans was conducting its business in the dark, protected by a white ghost and a wall of sound. We have to go, Kaelen said. We have to leave them to it. What about the protection order? Holloway asked. If we don't document this, we can't save it. If we document this, Kaelen said, we destroy it. Humans can't help but touch things. If they know there's a city down there, they'll send submarines. They'll send tourists. They'll send drilling rigs. They'll ruin it just by looking at it. He took the hard drive from the sonar console. It was warm in his hand. It contained the only proof of the whale city. It was the holy grail of marine biology. It was a Nobel Prize. It was immortality. He walked out onto the deck. The cold air hit him like a slap. The ocean was black and indifferent. He threw the hard drive over the rail. It splashed and sank, spiraling down toward the trench, returning the secret to the owners. What did you do? Holloway asked, standing in the doorway, witnessing the act. I protected them, Kaelen said. They turned the ship for home. The journey back was quiet. Kaelen sat on the stern, watching the weight dissolve into the night. He thought about Orion. He thought about the red eye. He thought about the intelligence that lived in the dark, an intelligence that had decided to draw a line in the water. But the story wasn't over, because as they neared the coast of Alaska, 3 days later, the radio crackled to life. Research vessel Aurora, this is the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Healy. We have you on radar. Maintain your course and speed. Prepare to be boarded. Kaelen and Holloway exchanged a look. They found us, Holloway said. Boarded for what? Kaelen asked into the mic. We are a civilian research vessel returning to port. You are a person of interest in a national security incident, the voice replied, cold and bureaucratic. The vessel you encountered, the gray corvette, was a classified asset. You are in possession of sensitive data regarding advanced biological capabilities. It wasn't poachers. It wasn't collectors. The gray ship was government. It was military. They weren't hunting the whale for a tank, Kaelen realized, the horror dawning on him like a sunrise. They were hunting him for a weapon. They wanted to dissect him to see how he works, to see how he breaks ships. They want to reverse engineer the tactic. The Healy appeared on the horizon, a massive icebreaker with a white hull and a red stripe, its radar dishes spinning. It was closing fast. We can't let them have the data, Kaelen said. The camera footage, the SD card from the attack. If they see how organized the attack was, they won't see nature. They'll see a threat. They'll see an insurgency. I thought you threw the drive overboard, Holloway said. "That was the sonar. I still have the video of Orion ramming the rudder. I still have the proof of their intelligence. If they see that it's possible to weaponize a whale, they won't stop until they catch him." Kaelen ran to the dry lab. He grabbed the SD card from the reader. He grabbed a lighter from the drawer. He held the flame to the plastic. It melted, bubbling and blackening, the smell of toxic smoke filling the room. He crushed the remains under his boot until it was nothing but dust. "Open the seacocks," Kaelen said to Holloway. "What?" "Scuttle the boat. If they board us, they'll seize the computers. They'll use forensic software to recover deleted files from the mainframes. They'll piece it together. The only way to be sure is to put the Aurora on the bottom. You're asking me to sink my ship, Doc. You're asking me to sink my home. I'm asking you to save a species," Kaelen said. "Orion saved us from the corvette. We owe him." Holloway looked at his ship, the rust-streaked walls, the worn instruments. He looked at the approaching cutter. He looked at Kaelen. "Crazy bastard," Holloway muttered. Then he smiled, a crooked, reckless grin. "Never liked this tub anyway. Drafty in the winter. Insurance is paid up." He went to the engine room. 10 minutes later, the Aurora was taking on water. They launched the life raft into the calm sea. As they drifted away, watching the research vessel list and slip beneath the waves, taking its secrets down to the crushing dark, the Coast Guard cutter pulled alongside. They were pulled aboard, wet and shivering. They were handcuffed. They were interrogated for days. But they had nothing to give. No data, no footage, no hard drives. Just a story about a rogue wave, a hull fracture, and a sinking ship. They were released eventually. Kaelen lost his license. He was blacklisted from every university. He ended up working in a fish cannery in Kodiak, smelling of salmon and failure, watching a line of gutting machines. The cannery in Kodiak was a purgatory of noise and cold. For 10 hours a day, Kaelen Vance stood in rubber boots on a concrete floor slick with fish scales and blood, feeding salmon into a machine that gutted them with brutal efficiency. The rhythmic clang of the machinery was a constant, mind-numbing drumbeat. He had traded the complex symphony of the ocean for the monotonous cacophony of industry. His academic career was over, buried under a mountain of sealed government files and the quiet whispers of his colleagues, who now saw him as a cautionary tale, the brilliant scientist who went too far out, stared too long into the abyss, and came back broken. He was a ghost, haunted by the memory of a ghost. But the ocean has a long memory. 2 years after the sinking of the Aurora, the incidents began. At first, they were small, dismissed as anomalies. A Russian submarine conducting exercises in the Kuril Islands surfaced with unexplained damage to its sonar dome, reporting a collision with a non-metallic biological. A South Korean longliner fishing for Patagonian toothfish in the Ross Sea had its line severed, not frayed, but cut clean through by something with immense jaw pressure. The attacks were isolated, thousands of miles apart, but Kaelen saw the pattern. He sat in his small rented room above a bar, plotting the coordinates on an old nautical chart. The incidents were forming a perimeter. Offensive violence was being erected around the high latitudes of the Pacific. The world was changing. The balance of power in the ocean was shifting, and only a handful of people on the planet knew why. Holloway was dead, his liver finally surrendering to a lifetime of whiskey. The crew of the Aurora had scattered, paid off, and threatened into silence. Kaelen was alone with the truth. One night, as a winter storm lashed the Alaskan coast, a package arrived. It was left on his doorstep, wrapped in oilskin, smelling of brine. There was no return address. Inside was a satellite phone and a single encrypted data chip. Kaelen plugged the chip into his ancient laptop. It took him a week to break the military-grade encryption, using old skills he had learned during a brief, misguided stint with the Office of Naval Research. The file contained a single audio recording and a set of coordinates. He played the audio first. He put on his headphones, and the sound of the cannery faded away, replaced by the familiar hiss of the deep ocean. Then a call. It wasn't Orion. It was a different dialect, one he recognized from recordings taken in the North Atlantic. It was a pod of pilot whales. They were screaming, a chorus of terror. Then a new sound entered the recording. A low, powerful hum. The 15 hertz frequency he had heard in the Bering Sea. The song of Orion's pod. Then silence. The pilot whale calls cut off instantly. The recording was a log of an execution. Orion's pod had crossed the Arctic Circle. They had moved into the Atlantic. They weren't just defending their territory anymore. They were expanding it. They were conquering. The white ghost of the Pacific had become the reaper of the Atlantic. Kaelen looked at the coordinates. They were for a remote island in the Faroe Archipelago, a windswept rock in the middle of the storm-tossed waters between Norway and Iceland. It was the last place on Earth he wanted to go. It was the heart of the storm. He quit his job the next day. He cashed out his meager savings and bought a one-way ticket to Torshov. He didn't know who had sent the package. He didn't know if it was a trap, but he knew he had to go. The mystery he had tried to bury 2 years ago had resurfaced, and it was dragging him back into the deep. The island was a fortress of basalt and sea spray. Kaelen rented a small cottage on the coast, telling the locals he was a writer seeking solitude. He spent his days watching the water, scanning the horizon for a white fin. He spent his nights listening. He had brought a portable hydrophone array, a ghost of his former life. The ocean here was different. It was loud. The North Atlantic is a busy place, a highway for shipping, a battleground for navies. The noise pollution was a constant roar. But underneath it, Kaelen began to hear the whispers. The 15 hertz hum was here. Faint, but present. The ghosts had arrived. He didn't have to wait long. A week into his stay, the news broke. A NATO submarine, the French Suffren, had gone silent during a deep water exercise south of Iceland. It had simply vanished from the tactical plot. No distress call, no debris, just gone. Kaelen knew. He felt a cold certainty in his bones. It wasn't a mechanical failure. It was an interdiction. That night, he took his small inflatable boat out into the chop. The satellite phone from the package chirped. A text message appeared on the screen. It was just a single word. Listen. He dropped the hydrophone. The sound that came through was not the sound of whales. It was the sound of metal. The groaning, screeching protest of a submarine hull being crushed by immense pressure. It was the sound of bulkheads imploding. It was the sound of a tomb being sealed. And woven through the tapestry of destruction, like a thread of gold, was the triumphant, complex song of Orion's pod. Kaelen recorded it all, his face numb with horror. They weren't just disabling ships anymore. They were sinking them. They had escalated. He returned to the cottage, his hands shaking so badly he could barely tie the boat up. As he walked up the path, a figure stepped out of the shadows. "Dr. Vance," the man said. He was tall, dressed in a dark, functional overcoat. He had the quiet, watchful eyes of a man who lives with secrets. "Who are you?" Kaelen asked, his hand instinctively reaching for the flare gun in his pocket. "A friend," the man said. "The one who sent you the package. My name is irrelevant. I represent an organization that believes you were right." "What organization?" "One that has been monitoring the acoustic activity of the deep ocean for 60 years, the man said. "We started during the Cold War, listening for Russian subs. We kept listening. We heard them long before you did. We just didn't know what we were hearing." The man gestured to the cottage. "May I?" They sat in the small, sparsely furnished room. The man placed a briefcase on the table. "The vessel your friend Captain Halloway encountered?" the man said. "The gray corvette? It was one of ours. A joint task force. We've known about the albino for a decade. We codenamed him Moby. Our objective was not collection. It was termination. You were trying to kill him? We were trying to prevent what is happening now, the man said. Moby is not just an animal, Doctor. He is an idea. A revolutionary. He is teaching other pods a new culture, a culture of organized, aggressive resistance to human activity. He is a biological insurgent. So you sent a team to kill him, and they failed. And now you're sending submarines, and they are failing too. Correct, the man said. Which is why we are here. We have a problem we cannot solve with torpedoes. Every time we engage them, they learn. They adapt. They turn our own tactics against us. They are a learning machine. What do you want from me? Kaelen asked. You are the only human on Earth who has been in close proximity to him and survived. You are the only one who has communicated with him. I touched his nose, Kaelen said bitterly. That's not communication. Isn't it? The man asked. He let you. He sought you out. He showed himself to you. Why? We believe he sees you not as a threat, but as an ambassador. A neutral party. Ambassador for what? A war? A negotiation? The man corrected. He opened the briefcase. Inside was not a weapon, but a piece of technology. A small, spherical device that glowed with a soft blue light. This is a biomimetic acoustic transmitter, the man explained. It can replicate any cetacean dialect with perfect fidelity. It can even generate the 15 Hz frequency. We want you to take it back to the trench, back to their city. And do what? Ask them to surrender? No, we want you to offer them a deal. The deal was insane. A global treaty enforced by the UN that would designate the deep ocean everything below 2,000 meters as a sovereign territory. No drilling, no deep-sea mining, no military activity. A complete withdrawal of humanity from the abyss. You expect a whale to understand a treaty? Kaelen laughed, a harsh, broken sound. We expect him to understand a border, the man said. He has already established one. We are simply proposing to recognize it officially. In exchange, the attacks on surface shipping must stop. And if he refuses? Then we deploy the alternative, the man said, his eyes hardening. A targeted biological agent. A virus that affects only Orion Orca. It is virulent. It is incurable. It will be an extinction-level event. Kaelen stared at the man. Genocide. Survival, the man corrected. The human race will not be blockaded. We will not be starved. This is the last, best hope for a peaceful resolution, Doctor. But we need a messenger. We need you. Kaelen looked out the window at the dark, heaving sea. He thought about the red eye. He thought about the intelligence that had looked back at him, not with malice, but with a profound, ancient weariness. He had tried to protect the secret, but the secret was out. And now, the fate of two species rested on a conversation that had never happened before in the history of the world. I'll need a boat, Kaelen said. A submarine? The man smiled. We have one waiting. The journey back to the Bering Sea was a silent, claustrophobic descent. The submersible, a deep-sea research vessel called the Challenger, was a marvel of technology, a titanium sphere that could withstand the crushing pressure of the abyss. Kaelen was a passenger, a diplomat in a cage. The man in the overcoat was with him, along with a crew of 2 silent pilots. They reached the coordinates of the Aleutian Trench. The sub descended into the blackness. We are approaching the site, the pilot said, his voice calm, robotic. On the sonar screen, the basalt columns appeared, glowing green in the display. The whale city? It was empty. Where are they? Kaelen asked. They know we are here, the man said. They are waiting. He handed Kaelen the acoustic sphere. The frequency is set to Orion's dialect. Speak clearly. The device will translate your vocal patterns into their language. Kaelen took the sphere. It was warm to the touch. He keyed the microphone. Orion, he said, his voice trembling. My name is Kaelen Vance. I come in peace. The sphere emitted a series of clicks and whistles, a strange alien translation of his words. The water outside the viewport remained dark. I carry a message from the world of the surface, Kaelen continued. We wish to propose a truce, a division of the world, the deep for you, the surface for us, silence. This is your only chance, Kaelen said, his voice hardening. If you refuse, we will be forced to deploy a weapon that will destroy your kind. This is not a threat. It is a promise. The water exploded with light, not from the sub, from the city. The basalt columns began to glow. Bioluminescent organisms, living on the rock, pulsed with a soft blue light, illuminating the entire plateau. And in the light, Kaelen saw them. They were not just orcas. The city was populated by a species he had never seen before. They were cetaceans, but they were different. Longer, more serpentine, with massive glowing eyes adapted to the eternal night. The orcas were there, but they were not the masters. They were the soldiers. They were the outer guard. And in the center of the city, coiled around the largest basalt pillar, was a creature that defied biology. It was a whale, but it was immense, 100 feet long, its skin covered in a mosaic of glowing patterns. It looked ancient. It looked like the god of the deep. A sound filled the sub, vibrating through the hull. It was not a call. It was a thought, an image projected directly into Kaelen's mind. He saw the birth of the oceans. He saw the first single-celled life. He saw the dinosaurs come and go. He saw the first clumsy amphibians crawl onto the land. He saw the rise of humanity, a brief, noisy flash of fire and steel. And then he saw the future. A silent, blue planet, the oceans teeming with life, the continents green and overgrown, the cities of man crumbling into dust. The message was clear. You are not negotiating with us. The thought echoed in his skull. You are a fever we are waiting to break. The treaty is accepted, not because you offer it, but because it is our will. Now leave, and do not return. The light from the city faded. The abyss returned. As the challenger ascended, Kaelen looked at the man in the overcoat. His face was pale. He had heard it too. Did we win? Kaelen asked. No, the man said, looking at the depth gauge rising toward the surface. We just bought ourselves a little more time. The truce held. The attacks stopped. The shipping lanes reopened. The world went back to its noisy, oblivious business. The story of the whale war was buried, a secret known only to a few. But Kaelen knew. He knew that humanity hadn't been offered a treaty. They had been given a leash. They had been allowed to continue living on the surface, as long as they behaved. He sat on the beach in Kodiak, watching the tide come in. He thought about the ancient creature in the deep. He thought about the red eye of Orion, the guardian at the gate. And he knew that the mystery wasn't the white whale. The mystery was us. How long would we last? How long until the fever broke? He looked out at the ocean, and for the first time, he felt like a stranger on his own planet. The truce, as the man in the overcoat called it, held. The world, teetering on the brink of a logistical apocalypse, pulled back. The blue curtain lifted. Shipping lanes reopened, cautiously at first, then with the old, reckless abandon. The global economy, bruised and terrified, began to heal. The official explanation for the months of chaos was a coordinated series of eco-terrorist attacks using sophisticated sonic weaponry, a narrative that was plausible enough for a world desperate to believe that it was still in control. The story of the whale war was buried under a mountain of classified documents, a secret known only to the handful of people who had stood on the precipice and looked down. Kaelen Vance returned to a life of quiet anonymity. The men in black suits had released him, but he was a marked man. His passport was flagged. His communications were monitored. He was a ghost in his own life, allowed to exist as long as he remained silent. He moved to a small, isolated cabin on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington state, a place where the rainforest met the sea, a landscape of perpetual mist and green gloom. He didn't work. A quiet, anonymous foundation deposited a modest stipend into his bank account every month. Hush money. He knew, but he took it. It was the price of his silence and the cost of his survival. He spent his days walking the rugged, driftwood-strewn beaches. He didn't take samples. He didn't carry a camera. He just watched the gray horizon, feeling the rhythmic pulse of the waves like the breathing of a sleeping giant. He was no longer a scientist trying to categorize the world. He was a monk in a silent monastery, listening for a voice he knew he would never hear again. Years passed. The world forgot the fear. New submarines were built, faster and quieter. New deep-sea drilling platforms were deployed, pushing further into the abyss. Humanity, with its short, arrogant memory, began to test the boundaries of the treaty that had never been written, the one that only Kaelen knew existed. He expected the attacks to resume. He waited for the news reports of sinking ships and severed cables. But there was nothing. The ocean was quiet. Too quiet. One evening, as a storm rolled in off the Pacific, Kaelen was sitting on his porch, watching the waves crash against the sea stacks. The satellite phone, the one the man in the overcoat had left him, chirped. It hadn't made a sound in a decade. He picked it up. A single image was on the screen. It was a satellite photo, time-stamped just hours before. It showed the familiar waters of the Bering Sea. In the center of the image was a flotilla of Russian crab boats. And surrounding them, unmistakable even from orbit, was a ring of white. It wasn't ice. Kaelen zoomed in. His breath caught in his throat. It was a pod of white orcas, not just one. A dozen of them. Their pale bodies glowed against the dark water. In the center of the pod, larger than the rest, was Orion. But he was not alone. Swimming beside him was a smaller white whale. A calf. "He's been breeding," Kaelen whispered. "He's not just a mutation. He's the start of a new lineage." The phone chirped again. A text message. "They are gathering. Something is wrong." Kaelen spent the next 24 hours scouring the deep-web scientific forums and naval intelligence leaks that were his only connection to his former life. The data was sparse, but a terrifying picture began to emerge. A new sound had been detected in the deep ocean. It wasn't biological. It was a low-frequency rhythmic pulse, originating from the Gackle Ridge in the Arctic Ocean, the northernmost edge of the mid-Atlantic ridge. It was a sound of drilling, but no oil company was operating that far north, under the permanent ice cap. The seismic sensors were picking up tremors. The magnetometers were registering a strange, fluctuating magnetic field. And the hydrophones were picking up the sound of whales screaming. Kaelen knew, with a sickening certainty, that the truce was not with humanity. The truce was a preparation. The enemy the whales had been fighting wasn't us. We were just the symptom. The disease was something else entirely. He packed a bag. He left the cabin and drove south, to a small, forgotten marina where an old friend kept a boat. He found Holloway's first mate, a man named Jensen, who had been on the Aurora and had seen the ghost. Jensen was old now, his hands gnarled with arthritis, but his eyes still held the memory of the deep. "They're in trouble," Kaelen said, showing him the satellite photo. Jensen looked at the image of the white pod. "The ghosts," he breathed. "I knew you weren't crazy, Doc. I need a boat," Kaelen said. "I need to get to the Arctic. You go up there now, you're not coming back," Jensen warned. "The ice is breaking up early. It's a graveyard." "They're our responsibility," Kaelen said. "We saw them. We know they exist. We owe them." They took Jensen's boat, a sturdy, ice-strengthened vessel called the Wanderer. They sailed north, up the coast of Alaska, through the Bering Strait, and into the Chukchi Sea. The journey was a grim pilgrimage into a dying world. The water was too warm. The ice was rotten, gray and thin. The sky was a hazy, unnatural yellow. As they neared the edge of the permanent ice pack, the radio began to crackle. It wasn't a voice. It was a signal. The 15 hertz hum. Orion's call. But it wasn't a call of warning. It was a call of distress. They found the source of the signal at the edge of the ice. The scene was apocalyptic. The ice was shattered for miles, pushed up into pressure, ridges the size of buildings. The water was black, slick with a substance that wasn't oil. It was a thick, viscous ooze that seemed to absorb the light. And in the center of the devastation, the creature from the deep, the god of the whale city, was dying. The massive, ancient whale was beached on an ice floe, its 100-foot body half out of the water. Its skin, once a mosaic of glowing patterns, was dull and gray. The ooze coated its fluke, eating away at the flesh. It was breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. And surrounding it, trying to push the massive body back into the water, was the pod. The orcas, the sperm whales, the deep dwellers Kaelen had seen in the city. And among them, glowing like avenging angels, were Orion and his white family. They were nudging the dying god, calling to it, their whistles a chorus of grief and panic. "What is that stuff?" Jensen asked, his voice shaking. "I don't know," Kaelen said, taking a sample of the black water. "But it's not from this planet." He looked at the ice. At the center of the shattered field, a hole had been melted through the ice cap, a perfect circle 100 yards wide. The water in the hole was boiling. The drilling sound was deafening now. Something was coming up from the Gackle Ridge, something that had been buried for millennia, something that the whales had been guarding. The man in the overcoat hadn't wanted a treaty to protect humanity from the whales. He had wanted a treaty to keep humanity out of the way, so the whales could fight the real enemy. Orion saw their boat. He broke away from the dying god and swam toward them. He surfaced beside the wanderer, his red eye fixing on Kaelen. The message came not as a sound, but as an image in Kaelen's mind, a projection of pure thought. He saw a meteor streaking through the atmosphere, eons ago. He saw it crash into the Arctic, burying itself deep in the planet's crust. He saw the ancient whales, the first ones, converge on the impact site. He saw them use their immense psychic power to seal the crater, to build a prison of rock and pressure around the thing that had come from the stars. And then he saw the prison breaking. He saw the drilling. The thing was waking up. "Help us," the thought from Orion echoed in his skull. It was a plea, a desperate, final prayer from one intelligence to another. Kaelen looked at the dying god on the ice. He looked at the boiling hole. He looked at his own 2 hands. What could he do? He was a biologist, a canner, not a soldier. Then he remembered. The gray corvette, the bubble net, the resonance. "Jensen," Kaelen said, his voice hard, "get on the radio. Broadcast on every frequency. Tell every ship in the Arctic Russian, American, civilian, military, to get here. Tell them the planet is under attack. They'll think I'm drunk. Then tell them there's an oil strike, a massive one. Just get them here. We need hulls. We need noise." The plan was insane. It was a suicide note written on the ocean. But it was the only plan they had. They would use the ships as amplifiers. They would coordinate a massive, global acoustic blast aimed at the Gackle Ridge. They would try to trigger a seismic event. They would try to bury the thing under a mountain of rock. It was a desperate gamble. It would probably kill every whale in the Arctic. It might crack the planet's crust, but it was better than letting the black ooze spread. As Jensen began broadcasting the frantic mayday, Kaelen looked at Orion. The white whale seemed to understand. He dipped his head in acknowledgement. Then he turned back to the dying god, back to the battle. The mystery of the Albino Orca was never about his color. It was about his purpose. He wasn't a freak of nature. He was a guardian, a sentinel, a soldier in a war that had been raging in the darkness for longer than humanity had existed. Kaelen Vance, the disgraced scientist, the man who had lost everything, keyed the microphone. He began to coordinate the symphony of destruction, his voice steady, his purpose clear. He had found his ghost. And now, together, they would make their last stand at the top of the world. We look at the creatures of the deep and see monsters. We see teeth and darkness and the cold alien logic of survival. We rarely see sentinels. We rarely see soldiers. We forget that the history of this planet is written not in stone, but in water. And the water remembers everything. The story of Orion, the white ghost, is not a story about an animal. It is a story about a war that is older than our species. A war for the soul of the planet. We are not the main characters in this story. We are merely the noisy, oblivious children playing in the background, unaware of the giants fighting in the shadows to protect us. The ocean is not a resource. It is a battlefield. And its guardians are not black and white. They are the color of ghosts, the color of sacrifice. If this final chapter in the story of the white whale has moved you, if it has made you look at the blue on your map with a new sense of awe and humility, please hit that like button and subscribe. The world is full of mysteries, and we are here to explore them together. Until next time, stay curious and listen to the silence. It might be trying to tell you something.